Engage for Success Radio, raising the profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.
Good afternoon and welcome to Engage for Success Radio show number 637, The Daily Deposit, Why Annual Training Fails and How 15 Minutes a Day Transforms Culture. So we're today talking about why the Daily Deposit produces better results. I'm Jo Dodds, your host for today. I'm an engagement consultant working within the Engage for Success core team. The Engage for Success movement is an inclusive movement committed to the idea that there is a better way to work by releasing more of the capability and potential of people at work. We spread the word about employee engagement and shine a light on good practice, inspiring people and workplaces to thrive. And we're widely supported across the UK, involving the public, private and third sectors. If you go to our website, engageforsuccess.org, you can use the link at the bottom of the page to join our newsletter list, and all our social media links are there too. My guest today is Sharon Grossman, who's psychologist, TEDx speaker, and an expert in behaviour change and workplace culture. Welcome, Sharon. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Lovely, excellent. So start by telling us a bit about who you are, what you do, and I'm interested in the TEDx bit too.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I, as you mentioned, studied to be a psychologist, and over the past 20 plus years, I've worked with professionals from all different levels and different industries, first as a therapist, then as a coach, helping leaders bounce back from burnout, and now with organizations that have a revolving door of talent that are interested in transforming their culture so that their employees become motivated to stay.
Lovely, excellent. And what did you talk about on TEDx?
Well, essentially, it's associated with my new book, Don't Buy Their Lunch, Buy Their Loyalty, where I talk about a system that I teach of 5 daily habits to promote employee retention.
Oh, that sounds interesting. Oh, well, hopefully we'll talk about that as we go. So
Yeah.
let's start by talking about people who want to be successful leaders, they want to be great managers. And we talk a lot about the fact, I think people quote it all the time. And it's funny, there's so many things that get quoted all the time. And I sort of wonder, why do we not do things about them so that the quotes are sort of, no longer relevant? So I can't remember what the quote is, because as listeners will know, I always forget that's the exact wording. But the thing about how most managers haven't had any training or any development. And so, we're saying generally people need that. But, what should we do? Because clearly we keep saying they don't get the training. So what should we do to develop our leaders?
Well, I think that is a real issue. We see a lot of times, this is what we call accidental managers, where people
Yes.
are really good at what they do, and then they get promoted because they're so good at what they do. But the thing they get promoted to, which is leadership, is a completely different skill set. And we fail to see the fact that just because they're good over here doesn't mean they're going to be good over there. And while we give them the promotion and the title, if we're not giving them the tools and the training, then they're going to have to basically wing it. And now we are, subject to whatever their personality style is, whatever they might have grown up with from their parents or their past bosses. Who knows what you're going to get? So it's really putting your culture at risk, which I think is kind of crazy if you're running a company to just make that a willy-nilly decision, and especially if you're not going to provide them any training. So what I like to do is come in and provide them with exact behaviors that we know check all the boxes in terms of what keeps people. And so what I'm talking about here is if you look at the research in terms of what makes people motivated to stay versus people that want to leave because they're not having a good experience at work, it's really simple stuff. But just because it's simple doesn't mean that we're doing it. And so I'm really here to advocate for us to be more intentional and do these things, not once in a while, not, once a year when you're throwing a holiday party or what have you, but actually on a daily basis. And I think it makes all the difference. So, for example, one of the things I found in the research is that when you have teams that have a low sense of belonging, 1 in 4 employees regularly thinks about quitting. compared to when you have teams with a high sense of belonging, that number drops to less than 2%. That's a highly significant difference. And so, how do you create that sense of belonging? That's something that you should be asking yourself, and that's something they should be creating on purpose. Another thing from the research is that people like to feel recognized. And if somebody hadn't been recognized for an entire year, they are twice as likely to quit as those who had been recognized. So, I think even listening to that, the research isn't even saying recognize somebody every 5 minutes or what have you. But what we do see is that when we do it on a regular basis, it does create a culture of appreciation. People become more motivated when they know that all of their efforts are being seen. And so this is not a hard thing to do, but it is something that requires intentionality. And so I really urge leaders to huddle with their teams every single day, to spend a few moments recognizing somebody. It doesn't have to be everybody in your team, but pick one person a day that you're going to recognize and mention not just what they did, but why it mattered. And then encourage the peers to recognize one another because they're the ones working together. They're the ones that see what's happening on the ground. That creates a culture of appreciation. And doing those huddles every single day also creates that sense of belonging. So that's an example.
Lovely. So we have our person, and we like to talk about, what do you do on Monday morning when you've listened to this show, sort of thing. So we have somebody who's about to promote somebody to be a leader, and we're going to talk to them about firstly that having those regular huddles and recognizing people. What else are we going to be suggesting they do?
Well, so another thing that we do in the huddle, which is actually really impactful, is we assess the team's mood on a daily basis. So we have a leader board. So it's basically a cheat sheet for the leader where we take them step by step, everything they need to do during that 15-minute huddle every day. So they don't have to have extensive training in leadership and they don't have to rely on their past experience or what have you. It's literally like we're saying, if you're in this position, this is what you do. You show up, you gather everybody, you have 15 minutes on the clock, you go step one, ask them about how they're feeling. And we put up a QR code, they scan it, it takes them to something on their phone, and they literally, in like 3 seconds, click on smiley face, neutral face, or frowny face. And in just 1 minute, the leader gets a sense of how everybody is feeling without anybody feeling like vulnerable having to share in front of others if they don't want to. But you could say, we've got 12 people here today, and I see 9 of you are doing amazing. That's great. But 3 of you are struggling. So it opens the door for those conversations. And you can say, if you guys want to share, please do. We really want to see how we can help you. And if they
Mm-hmm.
don't, then you can say as the leader, my door's open. Feel free to come and see me afterwards and so forth. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that's a piece of it. And then there's also the opportunity, if they want, optionally, to leave some comments in that same app. So they click on the smiley face or whichever face they feel, and then they can write what's going well or what's not going well, and that gives you some insights. And when we've implemented the entire system, this is just one part of it, in
Mm-hmm.
organizations, what we found is that the leaders say this is their absolute favorite feature. And the reason for it is because they know what's happening in real time and they can respond. And especially if you've got an older leader and younger generation people on their team, it helps them understand their mindset. What are they thinking about? What are they unhappy about? You know, you're not necessarily going to get this in a conversation often, especially if you're not asking the right questions. But
Yeah.
when you give them the opportunity to anonymously share what they're feeling and why they're feeling it, you start to get some really good data points and it allows you to pivot as needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, your research says that people managers think people leave quite often for more money, but your research suggests different to that, and you talk about three core motivators. what are those? What's the
Yeah,
detail on it?
so I already mentioned two of them. So one
Hmm.
is we want a sense of belonging. And if you go to work every day and you just feel like the culture is broken, you don't feel like you really belong there. There's nothing to really connect you to. It's not just the work, right? Like we often hear like the work can be your calling, but if you don't like your team or you don't like your manager, that is often a reason why people leave because
Yeah,
the culture is so important. So we really have to be intentional about culture. And so, because if I'm a nurse, as an example, uh, if I don't like the culture at hospital A, I can just be a nurse at hospital B or hospital C. There's no shortage of jobs, right? And so, if you're my boss or you're the hospital, you want to think about how do you keep the people? It's not just about hiring people to fill in these roles because think HR is really focused on, how do we find somebody to take on this role? We need to hire five more people, get them onboarded, and then get them in their jobs. And then they kind of
mm,
pass it off to the manager to deal with them. But it's not enough just to hire the people because if you're not doing the right things from a culture perspective, you're not going to be able to hold on to them. And then it becomes a band-aid approach to just continue to hire new people to fill the gaps. So we really need to look at why are people leaving and do something about that. And so, if we understand the psychology behind what motivates people to stay, then we can reverse engineer that. So, as I mentioned, a sense of belonging is a big one. We already talked about a sense of, well, um, a sense of appreciation, right? Uh, but also like achievement. So people like to feel like they're doing something important. They're not wasting their time.
yeah,
We put a lot of effort into work. We want to know that it matters. And one of the ways that we feel that sense of achievement is if we have stretch goals or if we get promoted, then we know that we're growing and we're not stagnant and the things that we do are actually mattering. So also another retention strategy is to have a roadmap for your people. Like if I do a really good job over here, what's next for me? Is there a ceiling or do I have some room for growth? People want to know that they can stay with a company if they want to. And if they feel like, no one's really investing in my growth, no one's thinking about my future, and I see an opportunity somewhere else, I'm going to jump ship, right? So if we want to keep our people, we have to be thinking about these things, and we've got to create that roadmap. So that's another thing. And then finally, that sense of relevance, which comes again from just how you feel being when you're being acknowledged and all that. So to sum it up, we've got belonging, we've got achievement, and we got relevance. And together they spell bar. So I think it's just an easy way to remember it. And I like to say this is how you raise the bar on your culture by
yeah. Hmm.
intentionally creating those feelings for people on your team. And the way that you do that is by having those daily huddles, by asking people how they feel, by reviewing with them the purpose of why we're here. And we also take the organization's values and transform them into observable behaviors so that we are preaching every single day what it is that we want people to be doing. What does it look like? And that can stay top of mind if every day we're reviewing those things. So we spend a lot of time on that, on recognition, essentially things related to people. A lot of times people tell me, oh, we already do huddles. But then if you ask them, what do you do in the huddle? You get answers like, oh, well, we make announcements. And so it sounds very operations like,
Yeah,
where top management has shared, like, this is what we want you to do. And so the leader now has to tell their team, this is what's coming down from the top. And so it's really more it's great to do that. And we encourage you to do that, but it can't be the entire thing because then you're not focused on people, you're just focused on operations. So for us, we divide our huddles into three parts. The first is people, the second is operations, and the third is performance. And that's where, when you're tracking all the things that we've been talking about, like employee mood, like who's being recognized, like we also ask them what is getting in your way of doing an even better job. And so we're eliciting the kinds of things that they need, resources, things that are broken, things that are missing, so that they have an easier way of doing that. And so are we following up on those things after they've requested them? Are we actually fixing them? Are we replacing things? Are we buying new things? Whatever it is. So we're looking at data in that third piece and making sure that we're on the right track. And if we're not, making sure we figure out what we need to do so that we get on that right track. So
Mhm.
having those kinds of conversations on a daily basis is what creates that sense of belonging, and that sense of relevance. If you know that you're a high performer, and maybe you've made employee of the week now a few times, and you've made employee of the month a couple of times this year, and you see your name on the Hall of Recognition, and you've gotten a few bonuses for doing a great job. There's a lot in that from a psychological perspective that makes me prefer to work for you than for your competitor, because nobody else is doing this. As simple
Mm-hmm.
as these things may sound, and as little time and cost as is associated with the system, very few people are actually doing it, and that's your competitive advantage.
Mm. And so, going back to the idea of new leaders and new managers, obviously there's a sort of framework and some thoughts about what they can do. How do we make sure that sort of how they do it, the sort of attitude they have while they're doing it is the right one? Because it
Yeah.
sort of strikes me that you can do the things and tick the boxes, but still have people thinking that you don't mean it, and it's because you're just ticking the boxes and you've been told to do that, not because you're actually
Yeah.
genuinely leading people.
No, that is an excellent question. And actually, I'm coaching a director of a large organization right now who's having that exact issue. So the reason she was referred to me is because she is doing all the things that we say are good to do on paper, right? So
Hmm.
she's watching her body language and her tone, and she's trying to smile and say please and thank you. And she's asking about, how was your holiday and how was your kid's birthday party? But at the end of the day, she says to me, I don't actually care. The only reason I'm doing it
Yeah.
is because someone said it would be helpful. I
Hmm.
don't come to work to make friends. And all of
Mm.
these fluffy conversations are hard.
Mm.
And so what I realized is it's not enough to say the things and do the things, but you actually have to believe what you're doing and saying, because that comes across, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you hear somebody, especially if it's your leader, asking about your kid's birthday party. And I've had a similar feeling. I have to be honest with you. I recently had a similar experience, so I can kind of relate to what it's like on the receiving end. So I was doing a podcast interview with someone, and we did it where, you could see it had the video as well as the audio.
Yeah.
And I find that sometimes podcast hosts have like a very specific set of questions. Maybe they ask the same questions everyone, or whatever their
Yeah.
formula is. But it's almost like when I would answer the question, there would be nothing. Like there's no like, oh, okay, or like a
Hmm.
follow-up question. Like there was no engagement. It was like, okay, next question. You know, and then you're like, they're literally just checking boxes, and you can feel it, right?
Yes.
Like you're looking for that engagement, you're looking for the humanity in the person, and they're just like robotically going A, B, C, D. And so that's kind of like what it feels like, I think, when your leader is asking about your kid's birthday party, but they actually don't care. That you're
Mm.
just like, okay, I find myself answering, but there's like, I feel like there's nobody really behind that set of eyes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that there's like this hollowness. And so in coaching her, one of the things that we're working on is changing her belief. So I think that it's important to understand why someone shows up to work that way, right? And she's already told us, well, I find it hard to have those conversations. So, what makes it hard, right? There's some sort of thought process behind that.
Yeah.
So my job is to really to dig with her and to figure out what does she really believe underneath, and where does that come from, and how can we shake that up a little bit? And one of the things I've done so far is ask her, have you ever had a really good leader or a mentor or somebody that you really connected with? And she was like, yeah, I had this woman that I used to work with, and she was amazing, and this and that. And I said, and have you ever had somebody who, wasn't really all that interested in you, and maybe they weren't a very good leader and kind of made you feel, I don't know, squirmy or just uncomfortable or unseen? And she's like, yeah, I definitely had that. I was like, okay, so, having those 2 points of comparison, she actually said, oh, the person that I'm talking about, they kind of remind me of me 10 years ago, which I was like, oh, that's interesting, right? So there's a little bit of insight there. But having that point of reference, especially from her own personal experience, is a lot more powerful than anything I'm going to tell her, because then it's going to be just like a point in her head as opposed to a lived experience. So my goal is to get her to connect to how does she feel on the receiving end of A versus B? And, what must that person have believed about that interaction between them versus the other person? And like, where does she fall in that spectrum? And like, really digging into the psychology, the belief system, right? And because we know that's what's driving her behavior right now. And if she can cling on to this a new way of thinking about things, a new belief system, then she's going to show up with more emotional intelligence, essentially.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting.
Hmm.
I suppose in some ways it's sort of being open and honest with people as well. If that is, if that's who you are, that's who you are, sort of thing. I mean, you want to develop yourself, but also, we expect managers to treat people as individuals. That's one of our things we talk about in our four enablers. So we are individuals as managers too, aren't we? Sort of thing.
Yeah, and I would say, you can't hide behind the excuse of that's who you are, because not everybody's meant to be a manager or a leader, and if you can't fit the requirements of the job, don't step into that role, because, you're taking on a big responsibility, and it's not for everybody, honestly. So you got to know what you're signing up for and take it on really seriously, because it's affecting other people's experience at work. I know that the person that I'm coaching, they've already had people leave because of her. So this has a ripple effect. It's a very serious decision to make, and I don't think that employers are putting enough emphasis on who really deserves to be in that role, who can actually handle it, do they have the right skills? If not, are we doing something to bridge the gap? Um, we're waiting too long to have these conversations, if at all.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So one of the things is quite often managers don't have lots of good conversations. They don't know what's going on in their team, and they quite often find out too late, when somebody's leaving, that it sort of opens a whole can of worms of stuff that was going on that they didn't realise until that moment. What should managers be doing to pick that stuff up before it's too late?
Yeah, so that's essentially the difference between what we call a lagging and a leading indicator. So when we look at turnover, it's when someone's handing in their resignation letter and they're like, I'm done. And at that point, it's really hard to get them back, right? It's really hard to fix whatever was broken there. So if I ask you what's your turnover rate and you tell me it's 50% or whatever the percentage is, at that point, we know X number of people have left. Um, and while it's good to know that, because that tells us we need to work on something versus not, it's a lagging indicator. It's something that's already happened. What's more helpful is to focus on things that are happening in the moment. So we've already talked about a few of those things, and that's essentially why when I'm sharing in my book or in my TED Talk about what I call the performance habit, we're talking about 5 leadership behaviors that, if you do them on a daily basis, creates that culture that brings about the sense of belonging, the sense of relevance, the sense of achievement that keeps people at their jobs. These are all leading indicators. So, how do you get people to become motivated to stay? Is you create those huddles every day because then it's connection, right? Having a few moments with your leader to talk about what's going on. You're sharing how you feel every day. You are getting recognized on a regular basis. We're, as a leader, you're seeing who's being recognized, and the people who are being recognized most frequently are people that you might think about advancing, not just rewarding. So
Yeah.
that we already know that when you have that map of growth for people, that's another retention strategy. We're asking people what's getting in their way, so we're fixing those in real time, as opposed to getting people really frustrated that things are broken and then they leave. So we are doing everything very intentionally, asking the right questions, doing the right things, and doing it on a daily basis so that it's not like usually what we see is people do things like once a year with like an annual retreat for leaders, or they send people to a conference, or they do some big initiative, and well, or like a big holiday party or whatever it is. And people, they spend a lot of money and they take a lot of time to organize these things. It takes people away from their jobs. And I always say, because I speak at a lot of conferences, and I say, you guys are taking all these notes, which is great, but what's going to happen when you go back to your desk on Monday morning?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Mhm.
First thing people do is they panic about all the emails they've missed. They've got to catch up on those. Then they've got the emails that keep coming in all the time. Then they've got the regular meetings. So it's like if we're becoming really reactive and we're not making space for the things that we've learned at these big retreats and conferences and things, and in implementing those changes, and that has to come from people above us that actually create that space for us, that give us permission to implement these things. If we're not doing all of those things as an organization, why bother? Right?
Mm.
Why are you going to spend thousands of dollars to send your people out? And you're going to pay for airfare, and you're going to pay for hotels, and you're going to feed them, and you do all this stuff. And then at the end, like it's not moving the needle. What I'm proposing costs you very little to do. It takes only 15 minutes a day. And what we've seen from the research is that it actually does impact the engagement, the performance, the morale, the retention, and your customer satisfaction. So it's going to help your business in so many ways, and it saves a lot of companies a lot of money. So
Mm. Mm.
so it's not always those big initiatives that make the big difference. I'm really a proponent of small daily actions instead.
Yeah, absolutely. Which brings us right back to the title of the show. That's a good good circular thing there. So we've literally got a couple of minutes. What one thing should a manager listening to this do on Monday morning?
I say huddle with your team, bring them all together, ask them how they're doing, find something positive to share, about something that they're doing well so that they feel appreciated, and just listen to them. If they've got something that they're unhappy with or something that they need to do their job even better, ask them what they need and then follow up, right? So it's all about doing those things. But most importantly, as you're doing all those things, track everything. You want data so that you can see what your baseline is, and if what you're doing, if you're doing this continuously, is actually moving the needle. Is it improving? Is it staying the same, or is it getting worse? And
Mm.
with that data, you can go to a lot of good places.
Lovely. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you so much for today. It's been really interesting talking to you.
And thank you so much for having me. And I hope this was helpful for anybody listening.
Lovely, thank you. And just to let listeners know, next week Jo Moffat's back, and she's talking to I don't know if she's a regular visitor or a returner, Maria Pavia, and they're talking about culture.
Engage for Success Radio, raising the profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.